glad it is, because I wouldn't know how to get into this thing if I had to. So anyway, we appreciate that, and I always appreciate speakers that can stay on time too, because we have a busy schedule all the way through the rest of the afternoon. Our next speaker is Nancy, is it Lobb, L-A-B-B-E? Lobby, okay. Always have to be careful with that. But Nancy's with the Nature Conservancy Program Director. Nancy was born and raised on a family ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska, owned by our family for 5 generations over 115 years. Her upbringing gave her valuable on-the-ground experience in managing cow-calf operations and a deep understanding of the issues facing ranchers in America's northern Great Plains. Nancy has worked in a variety of capacities in the beef and bison production sectors, having held numerous positions through the beef and bison supply chains. Additionally, she is on the board of the Colorado Beef Council and U.S. Meat Export Federation, positions appointed by the Governor of Colorado. At the Nature Conservancy, Nancy is responsible for engaging and supporting grazing lands, coalitions, and other rancher-led collaborations through the 5-state region to support conservation outcomes, local communities, and connecting ranching and grazing lands initiatives with the beef industry sustainability efforts. She was part of the inaugural board of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and co-led indicator working groups that laid the groundwork for the U.S. beef industry sustainability framework. She remains a current board member for the civil society sector. Nancy holds a BS degree from Regis University with an emphasis in international business. So Nancy, welcome.
It's a lot of words for my short little talk, because I'm just going to get us kicked off here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tim Kalkowski, who's my partner in crime on this initiative that we did, and he's going to continue the conversation that we're going to talk about. As was mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy, but I'm also a rancher from Nebraska. My family homesteaded there, and so I often tell people I had to move away to find a husband, because I was destined to marry my cousin, because I'm literally related to everybody. So thank God I did find a good man to marry from Kansas, actually. So I've worked for a variety of meat companies over my career. I've been in the conservation community for about the last 10 years, but before that I worked for companies like Coleman Natural Foods, Maverick Ranch, Meyer Natural Angus, and since I've been with the conservation community, I've used that experience and that knowledge to actually be able to connect the conservation goals of the Nature Conservancy and other conservation organizations with that of ranchers on the ground. So it's a win-win for everybody. So with that, let's talk about the C word, climate. It seems like every time you turn around, you are seeing something in the news about climate. And every time you see something in the news, it's always about who's to blame. You know, it's about placing the blame on something. Whose fault is it? Transportation, yes. Transportation has a role to play. Fossil fuels, absolutely. Fossil fuels has a role to play. Land use. We probably shouldn't be cutting down all the trees in the Amazon. There's just something that has an impact. We probably shouldn't be doing that. Cows, yes, cows have an impact. They also have a very positive impact. So all of these things have an impact. And our first reaction every time this comes up is to be defensive. Well, it's not my fault. But this conversation is not going away. It is going to continue. And it doesn't matter how many times we point the finger and who we point the finger at, the conversation isn't going away. And what we think is that instead of pointing the finger, this should be considered an opportunity, because it is. Agriculture has a great story to tell, and ag is part of the solution, and we should think of it that way rather than being defensive. We think that this is a real opportunity for those that actually produce our food. So we're seeing this desire from consumers, and a lot of the work that I do, either with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef or with some of the other companies that I work with, we're seeing this desire from consumers to really know more about their food. And in the past, what you've seen is kind of on the minds of most people. This is a report that Zoetis puts out, and they've talked to a variety of different food kind of leaders in the industry. And food safety seems to always have risen to the top in the past. But what we're seeing now is this desire from consumers to know how their food is raised. What is the stewardship on the land that our food is raised? What about climate? If you look at the top 5 things there, you have weather, you have stewardship, you have climate change, all floating to the top 5 of what consumers are really interested in. So this, again, should be seen as an opportunity, not a detriment to the way that we produce our food. The other group that is really looking at this is companies and organizations. And this is just, I just did a quick internet search and I worked with a lot of these different companies on what their goals are. You see all these companies now setting these goals. I mean, McDonald's, they are set a goal to have net zero emissions by 2050. Cargill, 30% reduction of GHG emissions in their supply chain. Walmart wants to be a regenerative company by 2040. Holy crap, that's a big deal. And you know how these companies are going to make this happen? It isn't by doing things on their own. It's about working with you guys on the ground. That's how they're going to make this happen. That's the only way they're going to be able to meet their goals, is by working with you guys. Again, this is a real opportunity. And so what about climate smart practices? Yes, some people may have to change practices, but the biggest barrier to practice change, to moving to climate smart practices, is money. And so we've got to figure out, how do we get those resources on the ground to those folks that may need to change practices. And there's organizations out there like NRCS and others that are doing it, that are providing those resources. But I also think that there's others that you're seeing come forth. The Nature Conservancy has partnered with a variety of different groups to try to get resources on the ground to change practices. World Wildlife Fund has done the same. A lot of these corporate partners are also trying to funnel money to folks on the ground to actually change those practices. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind is that I say we put our climate blinders on. It's not all about carbon. There's a whole slew of valuable benefits to regenerative food systems. So we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about climate. The folks in the room that are on grasslands, biodiversity is a huge piece of that. Water is a huge piece of that. So we need to make sure that we're not just focused on climate. We need to make sure that we remember that there's a bigger piece of the puzzle here. So I'm going to turn this over to Tim, but one of the things that we did in Nebraska, as you guys might have heard, when the Biden administration came out with this 30 by 30 initiative all about climate, the folks in Nebraska kind of got up in arms about it a little bit, especially our governor. So one of the things that we did was, I do a lot of work with the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition, and Tim and I got together and said, you know what, we should bring these ag groups together and let's just see if we can form some sort of a coalition that would actually be proactive about this issue and not reactive. We're constantly reacting. And instead of reacting, we should be proactive. And so we brought a bunch of ag groups together in Nebraska and got them to talk about, what do they need on the ground? What does this mean for them? What about this whole conversation around climate? And so I just want to introduce Tim Kalkowski. Tim is a past chair of the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition. He's also a banker. He's also a rancher himself. He's just a terrific friend to us at the Nature Conservancy and to me personally, and I was really happy to work with him on this project. So with that, I'm just going to let him talk about the project from his perspective, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'll try to talk softer. That's hard for me to do. I'm going to be a challenge for you because I'm going to make you earn your money as I sway back and forth. How's that? Okay. When we talked about having this discussion, I didn't know how relevant this would be. But every session I've gone to over the last 2 days, they have mentioned climate. Every one of them. And then you mentioned today grant writing. And so the Nebraska Grazing Land Coalition is non-for-profit, just like all the others. So we're always looking for money. So we met in March of 2021, and we were trying to find out our next idea for a grant so we could, continue paying our people and making things work. And at that time, the Biden 3030 initiative had just become Executive Order 14008. And so I'm the chair at the time. We go to the meeting. I look around the group, and so give you a little demographics of our group. They're very passionate about grazing and grazing lands, which is what you would expect. Very private people. Private land ownership is very important to them. I would say they're deep thinkers, they're proud, and they're strong believers in what they do. I don't know this, but I would guess, for the most part, pretty Republican group around the table. And I'm not trying to be political, I'm just trying to set the tone. So when I brought up, hey, what are we going to do with this Biden 3030 initiative? I expected that I would get a lot of pullback and say, hey, we got to stop this. This is a problem. It's going to create problems for agriculture. This is something that's just going to be a real problem to deal with and to stay economically feasible and so on and so forth. But I did not get that response. Went around the table, probably 20 people. And again, deep thinkers, huge cross-section of ag involved all over Nebraska. To every person in there, every one of them unanimously said, we have a climate issue and it's not going away. They said, we in agriculture have a role to play. And maybe in Nebraska, a very big role because we are a strong ag state, as is Kansas and, a lot of the Midwest states. We need to take a position of leadership and strength. And we need a seat at the table. So that was the response we got. So from there, it's like, okay, so now what do we do? So we talked about what do we do best with the NGLC, Nebraska Grazing Land Coalition. Well, we do rangeland monitoring to enhance healthy grasslands. We do cover crop development. We do cedar tree eradication. We educate, mentoring, videos, grazing software, tours, traveling road shows. And probably the biggest thing we do is generational transition. And that's the key to this whole thing. That's the key to everything we do in ag. Because if we can't pass it to the next generation, then it dies on the vine, okay? So then we decided, okay, so how can we put all of the things that we already do and figure out this Biden 3030 deal? So we felt by doing these practices that we were already sequestering carbon, we were already improving our climate, we were enhancing water quality, soil health, and wildlife. So let's develop the concept. So then the idea was that Nancy and I got put in charge of going to visit with some of the people that we work with in Nebraska and try to create a collaborative effort. It was our goal, and create a grant, okay? So in June, I believe it was June of 2021, we went to Lincoln and we met with the Nebraska Environmental Trust. That's where we get part of our funding. We use other sources, but that at the time was kind of our large funding source. We met with First State Bank that I was associated, and you say, why banks? Well, if you think about it, everything we're going to do is going to require money. And so you got to get the banking industry involved, okay? They need to be involved at ground one. We met with AFAN, and AFAN in Nebraska is the Alliance for Future of Agriculture. We met with the Nebraska Farm Bureau and the Nebraska Cattlemen. And through those discussions, these were kind of the 5 or 6 takeaways. They wanted further discussion. They wanted a united front. Everybody said Nebraska needed to take a leadership role. They needed to be proactive. We needed a seat at the table. And climate change is here to stay. Same thing we talked about in our board meeting. Okay, so then we had to take it the next step. So they wanted to meet again. So we set up a meeting through the Nebraska Cattlemen. And so we met, and who was involved was the Cattlemen, the Farm Bureau, AFAN again, the Corn Board. We also invited the Nebraska Department of Ag and their leadership, and the director of Nebraska Ag did show up. We had Farm Credit. You know, that's kind of competitor to me in the bank, but I did not realize this, but Farm Credit has a legislative and climate division. And that's all they talk about is these issues, and they try to forecast it. How does that affect our borrower? How does that affect our industry, our economy? And so they were very helpful. And then we invited 4 individuals, producers, that we nicknamed influencers. We felt that these were people that were in leadership position and that they had the ability to call state and national congressmen and tell our story. So we met for about 4 hours, and it was kind of a brainstorming session. And some of the takeaways from this meeting were, first of all, it became obvious that we needed to sequester carbon. That's a pretty big part of this Biden 30-30 approach. But that's a problem because we don't know how to measure it yet. So we had lengthy, deep talks about how do we measure carbon. And so, we know that we can measure it in the forested land because it's the amount of growth on the trees. But in grasslands, I don't know that we've developed how to measure that in the soil. But as we talked, it became evident, we have a university. You have a university extension. They're working on this. So we need to collaborate with the university. We need to figure out how are we going to measure this so we can quantify it so it can be sold or measured, or maybe more importantly than sold is how do we tell the consumer out there this is what we're doing in ag and this is the benefit to you. So, we've got to figure this out, how to measure it. Something else that I think is extremely important and we in agriculture do not think enough about and do not value properly is the value to soil health by doing these practices, by sequestering carbon, having healthy grasslands, cover crops. What is the value for soil health, water quality, and wildlife? It could be, that might be the greatest value in what we do. I know we got to have an economic value to survive, but when we look at our neighbors and our global impact, we need to consider those because my neighbor in Lincoln, Nebraska is not concerned how much money I'm making off my rangeland, but they are very concerned with the water quality, the air quality. They're learning about soil health. We all are learning about soil health and the wildlife. So I think we need to really tune into that as we discuss this. And then the other issue is how do we spread the message of what we're trying to do? We in Nebraska, we can use University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We have a strong Extension Agency, obviously NRD, NRCS, FSA, and your other government agencies. But how do we spread and communicate this? And then we broke it down in between educators, legislators, end users slash consumers. And I'd say that's probably the most important one right there that we've got to communicate to. Something that else come out in the meeting that I was very surprised of, in these 4 influencers, because we had a lot of agencies, but we wanted the boots on the ground, and we wanted the producers there. And they said, one of them said, we don't always have to be incentivized to do the right thing. And that caught me off guard, but what he was trying to say is, in ag, we've been given this huge responsibility, and we need to make sure that we take care of that we really think through that we set it at a high level, and that sometimes we just need to do the right thing. Okay? So, as we come full circle, I think we need to make a call to action. Everybody in this room needs to think through this, because this is not changing. In your survey, the most important issue was environmental. We did not collaborate before this, but that's what it said. Am I right? So the young people are worried about what's this going to look like for them and their kids and their grandkids. And this is serious stuff. I think, I'll get on my bandwagon in a minute, but I think in ag, the most important thing we are facing today is generational transition. Who are we going to hand this to, and do those people have the same concepts, stewardship, morals that we did, and did we teach them right? And that goes directly back to the environmental issues, okay? Because this all has to play together. So our call to action is, I think number one, we got to have a united front. We've all got to buy in this together. We all have a role in this, and that, especially in Nebraska, but I think in all these grazing lands coalition, it starts in ag. We probably need to be the leaders in it, okay? I think it's very important that we keep private ownership rights. Can easements be a tool in the toolbox? Sure. When the Biden administration came out, everybody got up in arms, including our leadership in Nebraska, because they thought this was a land grab. I don't know that I'm going to let Nancy comment here in a minute, if we really know exactly what's happening, but I think we're pretty sure it isn't a land grab. It's going to probably have something to do with CRP, conservation, easements, maybe perpetual, and probably some that are not perpetual. It's going to have to do with what we as good stewards are already doing. We worry about the monarchs and the pollinators. We worry about cover crops. We worry about rotational grazing. We try to maintain wildlife in our forested area. All of that is what the 30/30 initiative is about. We are already doing what they are asking us to do. We just need to share our story and let them know that. We need to go to them, and I'm talking them, the Biden administration, and say, hey, this is what we are already doing in agriculture. It meets your 3 or 4 or 5 points. How can you help us? How can we help you with this? Because we're doing it, and we're darn proud of it. We need to share the story. We need to have a seat at the table. We need to be proactive, and generational transition is the key. So what we did is we started the conversation, and we started it through a process of unity with these groups. In these groups, it appeared to me they're all in. I mean, I got to be careful, all in, but they saw the merit in it. They were going to go back to their groups and have more talk about it, okay? So kind of in my conclusion, and then I'll let Nancy really conclude, but some ideas that come out of these meetings. Tax credits could be an incentive to do the programs to sequester carbon, so tax credits might be something that could be on the table. We need to involve the banks. We need to involve FSA and SBA to help cover producers' costs to build these improvements, these climate-friendly improvements. How would that look? Maybe less money down, lower interest rates, longer terms, government guarantees to enhance banks to help finance these. We need to figure out how to quantify and measure and work with our universities. Educate, educate, educate. And education means reaching out to the consumer, the end user probably. And out of this, we come up with a mission statement. Responsible and a sustainable use of our natural resources. That's what this think tank group come up with. On a side note, Nancy asked me, said, make it a little bit boots on the ground. Tell them a few things you're doing on your ranch to help with climate, okay? So one of the major things we do at our ranch is we have a riparian buffer. We sit between the Missouri and Niobrara River. So we have an area that we fence off. We do not graze, though some people would say there would be a benefit if we grazed it. And there's some truth to that. But what we're trying to do is let the trees do what they do and not affect them. Not let the cattle rub on them, destroy them. And that we think is taking in carbon at a high level, especially along the river and so on and so forth. Strong rotational grazing program. We got to keep, when grass is growing, it's taking in carbon. It's just the more you rotate, the more management practices you do on your grass, the better our environment will be. We try to, this might seem small, but we try to minimize use of large vehicles. We've gone to four-wheelers, side-by-sides. Our rotational grazing, we open a gate and move a salt mineral feeder, they move themselves. We really try to be cognizant of that. We do that not only for environmental reasons, fire, there's a lot of different reasons. We try to winter graze more so we're not starting the equipment. We try to let the cattle do the work and not machinery, thus not putting, the pollutants in the air. Cover crops, really trying to get involved in cover crops. With that comes the extra stuff, the soil health, the wildlife, the water quality, and there's an economic benefit obviously too. Recycling, that's something, I forgot to say this, but we need to get everybody involved. It's just not just ag, it's the urban areas. We can all recycle used oil, cans, plastics, metals. It's something that everybody can do. We do controlled burns. Well, you're saying that's going to put carbon in the air, but controlled burns enhances growth, which is taking carbon in. It also limits our use of chemicals and mechanical machine to put the chemicals on the ground to control cedar trees, weeds, so on and so forth. Most importantly, I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but I am. It's the generational transition. We've got to leave this better for this next group. So I wrote 4 sentences here. We in agriculture have a story to tell. It is a great story. It's a great story. It's a story of high morals, conservation, stewardship, faith, and family. A story that mirrors many of the same conservation-minded ideals in the 30/30 program. We need to tell this story. We need to share the story with our consumers. We need to be proactive, united and embrace our role in creating a better world for our neighbors and the next generation. Nancy, do you have a follow-up? I don't know what our time is. Do you?
Well, we actually have 1 minute left, but
Okay.
I'm going to grant just a few minutes for questions after that because the next one is a video. It's automated.
Okay. Do you want to just summarize what has happened since our meetings? We tried to meet again with this group. They are very interested in meeting again. We got kind of stopped for a second because it went to a national level, and I'll let you kick in there.
Yeah, so the Nebraska cattlemen obviously have been involved with NCBA's. Now they have now come out with their own goals. One is around climate. U.S. Roundtable is coming out with goals this year. So there's a lot of things going on at the national level, and we are kind of in holding mode in some cases because I think this group wants to get back together and figure out how they can plug into those goals as well. And so we plan to get this group back together again and meet again. I think the big takeaway from this is proactive, proactive, proactive. Don't be afraid of the C word. The C word is okay. It's something that you guys are already doing things as producers, and we shouldn't shy away from it, and we shouldn't stick our heads in the sand and think that it's going to go away, because it's not. You're seeing a lot of these companies, a lot of these groups, and a lot of different organizations talking about it, and it's going to continue. So we got to figure out how to be part of the solution, not think it's going to go away.
Okay. Nancy Brett, thank you very much. We're really right on time, but like I said, our next speaker is an automated videotape. So if that one goes over, I can just unplug the darn thing. But no, I thought that was a great presentation, but I think we can take some questions if there are any. Are there any questions? Okay, well, Nancy, thank you all very much. Very informative. So let's see where we are. We have one more, and we're right on time, and I want to thank the speakers for that. That's always a challenging thing of being a moderator, is some folks just keep going on and on and on and on and on. But these were two very excellent presentations in time allotted.